Hello and welcome back to the Warwick F1 show where we're doing our season review after about 8 months, 22 races. We're done. The season's over. Max Verstappen taking his first world title in fairly controversial circumstances at the final race of the season, but probably a deserved title based on the entire season and a season that was probably one of the best that we've ever seen. We're going to be looking through it, deciding who wins the awards that we are giving out. But obviously, I can't do this on my own. So I've got some guests with me. First off, as ever, my co-host, Jack Rowe. How you doing, Jack?
Hi, I'm glad to be back. Just jamming out to the intro music. It's good. The 2 weeks since we filmed the look back at Abu Dhabi's felt like the longest time ever. It's been so weird. I don't think I've ever felt not let down in some way, but it's like watching a film or really getting to the end of a really good book, and you're just like, oh, what now?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's not only been 2 weeks. We've had longer gaps between races than we have had since the end of the season, but it's felt a lot longer than it has probably been. Obviously, it's me, it's Jack, and it's also Chinmay. How you doing, Chinmay?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, it's been a very long month now since Abu Dhabi, and I'm still trying to recover from just how good the season was. I just love the season from start to finish. It's just what a season.
Yeah, so we'll get straight into some of our like awards, starting off with rating the season out of 10. We always do rating the races out of 10, so may as well do the season. We've also got some contributions, some responses to a Google form Jack put out in our Warwick F1 chat. So we'll be calling on them as well. But first off, I'll come to Jack. Rating of the season out of 10.
I'm gonna go with an 8. I think obviously with the title fight being so close, without the manufactured part of things, it was just like as brilliant as you could get, especially given the last 5, 6, 7 seasons we've had where it hasn't been that close. But for me, the part that takes away that extra 2 out of 10 is all the probably one of that is the general gibberish just on the last lap, because that was just like so fake. If I want to go watch manufactured racing, I'll go watch Formula E, and I will watch Formula E, but not for the same reasons I watch Formula One. And I guess the other point of that is the same inconsistent stewards' decisions throughout the year at Spa, I guess Lando and Sochi, at Silverstone, Brazil, etc., etc. So I'm probably feeling pretty mean giving it an 8 out of 10, but I'll stick with that.
Yeah, no, an 8 seems fairly harsh. Chinmay, what do you think out of 10?
I'll give like a 9.5. Are we allowed decimal points?
I mean, I was going to give it a 9.5 as well, so I'm allowing it.
Fine. I mean, the only thing that just chips away, I think the only thing that really just puts me off is kind of the whole Spa incident, and also just not all the races, especially in the first half of the season, where there was a couple of races which wasn't too much of a fan on, mainly Portugal and Monaco, to be fair. But yeah, as a whole, I just love the fact that we had a massive title fight, and I'm not the biggest fan of the way the season ended, but at least we had a result. So, and
Yeah,
we do have a victor, so and it was just one hell of a season. So,
yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to have to agree with you with a 9.5. I think it all really had it all. Like we had new winners, new races on the calendar, races that are normally boring. I'm thinking like France and Spain were throwing up some fairly decent performances. Obviously, we had those bad races. We had the Monacos, we had the Austrian races weren't great. Portugal, as you mentioned there, Zandvoort as well was probably another one.
yeah.
But you can't get good races every time. And just it was the overall narrative of having that title battle that was so close almost all the time. And they were coming into contact with each other left and right. It was really no holes barred. And I think my or the reason I docked that half a point was because of Abu Dhabi, as Jack mentioned. It's sort of like you sort of had such a good organic finale up until that point, and then it became very manufactured. I know I missed the Abu Dhabi review because I was on a ski trip in France and there was no Wi-Fi. It's very sad, but just watching the race there, it did feel like they just made it up as they went along. I mean, do you just want to run through quickly what you each said about that finale? Like, what were your thoughts on that moment, and sort of how did it detract from the season overall? Jack first.
I mean, I think we tried to not just look at that incident in the review of Abu Dhabi because it's so big compared to that whole race, and I didn't want it to take over everything, but it has that tendency to, because it's just like it's so difficult to say one moment is a title decider because a season isn't made up of one moment; it's made up of a cumulative effort. You know, Hamilton going off at Imola, Hamilton, crashing into Max at Silverstone, or starting it without changing tyres at Hungary. It's like so many things where he could have picked up more and more and more points, but it's so difficult to avoid that idea that things have been taken out of the hands of the drivers and put into the hands of Michael Massey and not done things correctly. So yeah, it's obviously, I think it ended the season on a sour note for me, not because I was necessarily wanting Hamilton to win or thought that he deserved it in the long run, but because I didn't feel that either driver had any say in how that last race was won.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. Like, people say Max Verstappen didn't deserve to win the title based on that race, and obviously that's something we'll come on to when we look at who was the best driver of the season. But you can't really say it was Max Verstappen's fault. Like, Chinmay, it was sort of out of his hands as well. But obviously he's the one that benefits. But you can say that over the season, drivers have benefited from a number of moments. It's not this one moment that just made it up, as Jack said. It's like probably hundreds of moments over the season where the championship could have been won or it could have been lost.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, you had the point. I mean, there's most of the time it was out of both their hands. I mean, one time we had Max's blowout in Baku towards the beginning of the season, or you go towards a bit further on where you just the inconsistent stewarding, especially impacting some decisions made where one person would argue should have got penalised and the other person didn't. But then obviously there are other times where both also could have decided their own fates. Like, Max Verstappen crashing Q3 where he missed out on pole position because of that. Or you got Lewis literally just driving into the wall even early on in the season, because some could even argue that even early on in the season could have decided the championship itself as well.
So we'll come to the Google form quickly. So the general consensus was 2 responses said it was a 7 out of 10 this season. I'm not quite sure what those 2 were watching. 3 said 8, 16 said 9, and 13 said 10. So I think probably averages out about a 9, and I think that's fair enough. I think you'd have to say easily the best season probably since 2012 and 2010. I think it'll be on that pedestal of since the new cars came in, or the thinner cars. We moved away from like the 2008 versions. These like 10, 12, and 21 have been the top 3 seasons since then. I mean, you'd have to agree with that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you could argue 2009 is like the overall story of Brawn coming to win their championship. But I think probably race by race is not as interesting as we have this season.
Yeah. Chinmay, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think nothing more to say. 2012 was a brilliant season, and then this F1 comparative has not been as interesting as than maybe 2016, but that at the end of the day was only between the 2 Mercedes drivers. And then 21, you had this clash of the titans, young versus older generation. I would say
it was very Cars 3. just the only thing that changed was
Really?
Lewis didn't win. It basically was Cars 3. You can't even turn it down.
Is that what it boils it down to?
2021 season, it's like Cars 3. Okay, so we'll move on to the best moment season. So we've got a short list in the Google form, which I'll just read out quickly. So we've got Ocon's win at Hungary, Ricciardo's win at Monza, Russell versus Bottas at Imola, the penultimate lap of Bahrain, so when Verstappen overtakes Hamilton but has to give the position back. The last lap at Abu Dhabi, obviously we've just talked about that. Just an insane final lap of the final race of the season. Not sure it can get any more insane than that. Mazepin's turn 3 crash at Bahrain.
I had to put that one on there. That was sorry.
Just starting the season as he needs to go on. The TV director fail in Monaco, where he switches to Lance Stroll, bouncing over some curbs. While we're seeing the one overtake of that entire race. Schumacher versus Vettel playing football at Spa, when it was obviously raining, and the Haas and the Aston Martin Twitter admins were having some fun. Ricciardo drives a stock car at COTA, driving Dale Earnhardt's legendary NASCAR, and Hamilton starting alone at Hungary. So, what would be your best moment of the season out of all of them? Maybe give a top 3 out of those moments. We'll come to Chinmay first.
I'll probably go third one. Third best was probably the TV director fail. I don't know, that's just personal thing. I just love that director fail. Like Monaco, not a single yellow flag in the entire race, and it was just there's nothing going on except that one bit with Gasly and Vettel, I believe. And then the TV director just switches it to Lance Stroll, bouncing over a curve that no one cares about. And then there's just there. I think the second one will probably be probably the whole Brazil weekend, just watching Lewis Hamilton just blast through the field twice, pretty much, in the sprint race and in the final race, and just watch how pretty much he went into God mode that whole weekend. And then probably the top one will probably be Ricciardo's win in Monza, because I think that was just... I just love watching Ricciardo win a race, and he is one of my favorite drivers on the grid, and he really needed that win.
Yeah, I mean, it still baffles me that out of the 4 Ferrari and McLaren drivers, Daniel Ricciardo was the one to get that win. Not Lance Stroll, not Charles Leclerc, not even Carlos Sainz. It was Daniel Ricciardo, in probably his worst season in F1 to date, gets that win. I mean, Jack, are those your 3, or have you got some other ones?
I had trouble narrowing this down to 10, so I don't know how I'm going to do 3. I've had a quick look. I'm glad Chinmay went first, because I would have been umming and ahhing for ages. I think on a whim, I'm going to go for number 3 is Ricciardo's win at Monza, the shoey as well, and Zach Brown's face after. Pretty grim, a pretty grim podium celebration. Number 2, I'm going to put Schumacher versus Vettel playing football at Spa. I think generally those two, as the relationship they've had, has just been brilliant to watch. It's been kind of an underlying but really wholesome part of the sport in the last year. And you know, since Seb came into the sport, we've had that family. But at number 1, I'm going to put Mazepin crashing out 3 turns into the season, because I've never laughed as hard, and I've not laughed as hard since. So
I think that was the biggest "oh no" anyway moment I've ever seen in Formula One.
I remember the start of the season. Everyone was like, Mazepin did more laps behind the safety car under the formation lap than he did actual laps of the race. It was really starting the year as he meant to go on. Now I come to my top 3, and I'm just looking at these, and there's so many. I think I'm gonna have to go for something. I was dying with laughter. Hamilton starting alone in Hungary. Like, you always think there might be a race when 19 cars retire, and we get maybe a red flag, and then it's just the one car starting on that grid. And it actually happened, not in the way we thought, but having one car on the grid, one car, 5 red lights out. It was so insane. I don't think it's something that we'll ever see happening again. Number 2, I think I might have to go for the penultimate lap in Bahrain. Just starting off the season with such a bang, like having the 2 drivers that would go on to battle for the title, battling for the race win. And it was almost like it's what we probably hoped that the season would be like. Obviously, it got to the point where they were sort of colliding every other race. But at that point, it was firm, it was fair. Obviously, that's probably because it was at the start of the season, didn't matter as much. But it was good racing. And I still think that race was one of the best of the season, and we'll come on to that a bit later. But for number 1, I think Ocon's win in Hungary. Like, obviously, we mentioned the Hamilton incident. Without the incidents that were in the race, Bottas going bowling, Hamilton starting on the wrong tyres, Ocon wouldn't have won that race. But it was just the way he kept the car on the track under pressure from a 4-time world champion, and his teammate holding back one of the fastest drivers in probably the fastest car on that weekend. I think you have to say that Ocon's win in Hungary was one of the best moments. And I mean, do you think we'll see races like this next season? Obviously, last year we had Gasly and Perez taking the win, taking their maiden wins. This year we've had Ocon taking his maiden win, Ricciardo coming back, taking a win for the first time since 2018. Do you think we have got lucky over the last 2 seasons, or do you think it's sort of like we're building for the future? Maybe we'll see some more maiden wins next season, Chinmay.
Well, I'm kind of being optimistic that next year that the new cars are actually much better overtaking, and the fact that this new cars car will actually bring the cars so much closer together that we'll have multiple winners. We can have at least 3, hopefully, 3, 4 different people challenging for the championship, and I just hope that I am being very optimistic that this stuff will happen, but I don't think I think not we haven't been lucky. It's just how things have been turning out the last couple of years with COVID, with the different tracks, with just things being so all over the place, and it's just nice to have a whole spectacle of new drivers winning, and just it's hopefully it'll be good.
Yeah, I mean, Jack, if you had said at the start of maybe 2020 that Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon would take their first wins before Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz, I think you'd be looked at like you were crazy. But you've got to think that in 2022, those 2 especially, like Sainz and Norris, should be looking for their first wins. They should be the ones that will be the 2. They'll be or maybe not the 2 that are coming from the midfield to win, but they're the 2 that are taking their maiden wins next season.
I mean, you'd hope so. I think it's very dependent on how the cars are. I'm not going to say now that they should be or they're guaranteed to get a win. Of course, I think it's going to be a little bit of recession, as it always is with the rule changes, and the cost cap will do something to cut down on that. And general changes to the car regulations, making it easy to overtake, will cut down on that a little bit. But I think the gaps are going to be far bigger than we've seen in the last couple of seasons. So yeah, I mean, of course, I think they're talented enough, and they should have got one win already at least. But that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. Hopefully they will next year, but I can't say it's a guarantee at all.
And coming on to the Google form, the last lap in Abu Dhabi gets number 1 slot on the best moment of the season. And although it was maybe a bit manufactured, you sort of want that to happen. You want the final lap of the final race of a title battle that's come down to the wire to be the best moment. And it turned out that most people thought it was. Then Ricciardo's win in Monza, obviously coming from, well, just putting in a performance of Ricciardo of old. Not like we normally saw this season, but definitely like a 2018, 2017 Ricciardo. And then finally, in 3rd place, Hamilton starting alone on the grid. We'll never see it again. I don't think it was that you had to be there on the day to see it. And I think if you show that photo in maybe 10 years' time to some new F1 fans, they'll just sit there and ask, what happened here? Why is there one driver? Why is there one driver on the grid? So that concludes our best moment of the season, and we'll move on to the best race. Oh yeah, go.
Can I? There was one moment that I semi-forgot and didn't put in, and a couple of people voted for as well. I just want to point it out was Russell's Q3 lap, but what kind of was at the time on pole in Spa. I just want to mention that because I did lose my mind watching that. So
yeah, I mean, you talk about his Q3 lap in Spa. His Q3 lap in Russia, putting it third. He really had a purple patch throughout that second or just middle of the season. We get Hungary, Belgium, and then Russia, all putting in really, really good performances. And you'd think that might help for next season. Maybe he will threaten Lewis Hamilton's dominance at Mercedes and potentially disrupt the drive for an 8th world title. But as I just mentioned before, we'll move on to best race now. And there are 22 candidates for this title, so you know which ones they are. And I mean, I'll come to each of you again, top threes. So starting at this time with Chinmay.
Okay. I'll probably go. Oh, this is actually because thing is, there's a lot of good races this season to choose from as well. I think third, I'll probably put Imola down for number 3 because just what I think that is one. I think the second race of the season, and that was the second race with both Hamilton and Verstappen clashed with each other. They didn't necessarily collide, but I think it was just to watch that race and then just to see how good overtaking was, and then Lando getting his first podium of the season, which I believe is his most deserved podium of the 4 podiums he's got this season, I believe. And yeah, that was just a really good race to watch, personally speaking. Second, I think I'll put down for is Bahrain, because what an opening race. You just couldn't ask for much better season opener than Bahrain. And then my personal favourite, I would say, was probably Baku. I mean, there was a good solid portion of the race that wasn't as fun to watch. I think there's a good solid and boring bit in the middle of the race, but I think the bit that just did it for me was just Checo holding up Lewis Hamilton for the whole race, and then the whole last few laps drama with the tyre blowouts, and then Lewis obviously overdoing his brakes and literally locking up in the first corner to that restart, and all just Baku drama, really. So I think that's why Baku gets my number 1 pick.
Okay. And Jack, what are your 3?
I mean, I think I've had a quick look through. I tried to write down all the ones that I thought might be worthy of it, and I've written down half of them, so that's helpful. There's so many good races. I'm going to go number 3. I think I'm going to put Bahrain, because it was just like it was. There were it was one of those ones where there were times when it was a bit boring, but it had the strategic battle that I like watching sometimes. There was the kind of the added stress of not knowing which was the fastest car overall. It looked like Mercedes maybe the second slowest car, the second fastest car, and they'd had a really bad start to the season, and then the last couple of laps was brilliant to watch. Number 2, I'm going to put Baku, pretty much for exactly the reasons that Chinmay said. I think that last lap with Hamilton going straight on, it was just like one of those moments where I realized this season was not going to be like standard fare. And then number 1, I think I'm going to put Brazil, not necessarily because the race itself, just the race, but the season is that weekend as a whole, from penalties and the sprint race and the actual race itself, just the side-by-side action, Hamilton charging through, it just never stopped. That weekend was 11 out of 10 for me. So
I mean, Jack, they're going with all the B races on the calendar, saying that they're saying they're the A-star ones. And my three, I think it's going to be fairly similar. I think third, I'm going to put Brazil. I think just as you said, the way Lewis Hamilton came through the field, making up 25 positions. One of them was for free on a Raikkonen spin in the sprint race, but he made up about 20, I think 22 of those 25 in a third of a race, or a third of the sprint, a third of a normal race in the sprint race, and then 10 laps in to the normal race, he's already up to third, and it's like we thought he might be stuck at the back, and he's just come up through the field and goes on to win the race, obviously, and it even came with a bit of stewarding controversy, which we also saw a lot of this season, and maybe we like to see but didn't like to see at some point. Number two, I'd probably have to go for Hungary. I think not again. It's another Lewis Hamilton charge, and I think it almost seems to be when Lewis Hamilton's at the back, having to come through. The racing or the spectacle is a lot better, but obviously it came with a new winner, Alonso, holding up Hamilton, making sure he couldn't get to the front of the field, and obviously just iconic moments like the Hamilton starting on his own, basically all of the top six being taken out at the start. I think it's a race we won't see for a long time. But number one, I'll have to go for the first race of the season, Bahrain. Just you can't really get much better for a season opener. Two cars that are basically on level pegging for the start of the season. Two drivers that are at the top of their game. Fair racing, as I said before, and you just can't get better for the start of the season. And I think had that race come instead of race one, race like 17, 18, I think that we'd look on it maybe a lot higher than probably it deserves to be. But I'll come to you both. Like one that I was quite surprised you both added was Baku, because was it just the ending for you, or was it like the whole race? Because I seem to remember that race was fairly dull. We sometimes get races of Baku that are brilliant, like 2017 and 18 especially, but they seem to rely on safety cars. They rely on that safety car restart, jumbling up the order. This one we didn't really have it, but it was still up there for you. I mean, why sort of was that? Was it just the ending? Was it the drama with Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, or was it something else? Chinmay first.
I think it was just. I mean, majority was that whole drama at the end where both ended up, but both the protagonists ended up losing out on points, but both for different reasons. And I think it's just probably I think it's just a bit of personal bias to Checo as well, because Checo was holding up Hamilton for practically the whole race. And yeah, I think it's just maybe that whole thing at the end that just blew my mind at that point in the season. To be fair, didn't think things would get much better, but they did. So,
I mean, Jack, was that the same with you?
Yeah, I mean it's the 1, 2, 3. It's the sixth race of the season, and things are. It's looking like they're going away from Mercedes, and then you see Max hit the wall, and then it's just like, yeah, there were other points in it. You can't say it was boring race. There was the silliness of, I think Mazepin ran on like twice at the back. Was there a safety car at some point like before that? I can't remember. The issue is
I think it was
it
was a red flag. It wasn't a safety car. It was a red flag because of Max's tire failure on the pit straight.
Yeah, no. There was laps as well. Stroll crashed first.
Oh yeah,
and then
that's
there was
true.
a red flag.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was.
Anyway, the point being, there was just like, it's so long ago that all I get is the memory of it, and then it was just like, oh my god. And a lot of that is of course going to be because of that last lap and because of Max crashing out. But it felt like justice had been served. No one came out of that the winner, but we had an incredible show in the meantime. So,
and I mean, looking at the Google form here, number one, Brazil. So it's hard to say why. Like the race in Brazil, what we had this season, I think, was a lot of races that had those moments that really stood out. There were no sort of races that were maybe good throughout. I think that's why we all put Bahrain quite high, because it was fairly decent throughout. But when I think to the races that we class as maybe good, you think like Silverstone had that moment, Russia had the moment, Baku, you could say, had the moment. Do you think Brazil was maybe bit more like Bahrain in that it was fairly good throughout? You had Lewis Hamilton coming through the field, or was it more like the other ones where you had that moment, or was it just the weekend as a whole was so insane that sort of bled into the race and made it maybe look a bit better and made it the number one race on the form?
I mean, Brazil was a bit of both, right? We have I think there was the overtake and then the failed overtake, both of which were very good, but it was just like, it was consistently good. I think when we talked about it in the podcast, in the show that we did, it was like there were 8 laps, I think, where we figured nothing happened, which in F1 terms, especially around a fairly short track at Interlagos, is pretty incredible. And there's probably true over the weekend as well, when you include the sprint race, when you include qualifying, when you include what happened before and after, and it's just like, nothing stopped that weekend, and that's kind of like, it's a little bit how you want F1 to be, and I think hopefully it's a glimpse into the future. So yeah, I think there are a couple of big moments, and they don't compare to the big moments like at Silverstone, like at I guess Monza and Baku, but they were certainly helped carried it forwards as well.
Yeah, I mean, Chinmay, is there anything else to add?
No, I think, yeah, like Jack said, I think it's consistently so mesmerizing throughout the whole weekend, because we had the whole thing with Lewis Hamilton from start to finish, from quali to the sprint race to the actual race itself. But then I think there are, like Jack said, there are moments that are bigger, like Monza, Baku, Silverstone, etc. And yeah, I think there's nothing much more to add to, really.
Yeah. And then second on the form was Baku, as you've all mentioned, or you two have mentioned there. And third was Monza. So Monza won a race none of us mentioned in our top threes, but has finished third on the form. Do you think that was another case of the moment? Obviously, Verstappen ending up on top of Lewis Hamilton's car, and then also Ricciardo coming back from what had been a fairly poor season to begin with, and then taking that win, McLaren getting that 1-2 finish. Do you think that made a difference? And why do you think none of us really put it in our top three, when obviously the general consensus was that it was the third race in the season among the people who polled? Chinmay?
I mean, I think I didn't put it in my top three because I just personally had bigger moments. Like the race in general, I did prefer like Brazil, Bahrain, Imola, and stuff, Baku. So I felt that the racing was a lot more interesting. There's a lot more racing going on in those races than Monza. I think with Monza, the main two bits were obviously the main collision where Max ended up literally on top of Lewis, and then the whole McLaren 1-2 thing. I don't think I can't remember too much like in terms of on track action happening on top of that off the top of my head. I mean, I think my memory is a bit hazy on that race, but I think in terms of an actual race, minus those two moments, I don't think it didn't have as much to offer compared to Baku and Bahrain and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, Jack, do you think that maybe, let's say Hamilton and Verstappen retire for mechanical reasons and then Ricciardo wins? Do you think it's further down? Do you think it needs that moment? It needs the title rivals coming together to really boost it up there, and maybe needs the 1-2 for McLaren, for a midfield team who managed to take the only 1-2 of the season? Had it been like, let's say, Hamilton and Verstappen retire for no reason and Bottas wins, it's a lot further down, especially if we just base it on the racing sense.
Yeah, I think it's a feel-good story, isn't it, right? And it really depends what you're looking for from F1 races, especially when you look back from now, because again, it's hard to remember exactly what happened lap by lap and how interested you were at the time. you just get this general sense of whether you enjoyed it or not, or whether there was that strong emotional feeling. So maybe the three of us, have a stronger emotional feeling from that title battle, especially looking back now. But of course, a lot of people, Ricciardo fans, and that is just like, that's the best moment in 2-3 years we've had. Maybe Gasly's the same, but yeah, it was a good race. You would not turn it down next year. If someone offered me Monza again, I would grab it with both hands. But yeah, it feels like that emotion was there with it more than necessarily non-stop action.
Yeah. And then another race that none of us mentioned, but was fourth actually, Russia. And now I think more and more about it. If we're looking for a race that's sort of non-stop action, well, not non-stop action, but it's always like it's on a simmer as opposed to being nothing and then maybe reaching boiling point. Russia was really up there because you had a mixed up grid. You had both Bottas and Verstappen at the back of the grid. Lewis Hamilton in the midfield and then gets a poor start. So drops back to seventh. He's got to make his way through. The first three on the first lap are a McLaren, a Ferrari, and a Williams. And then obviously it comes to the rain right at the end. That jumbles everything up. Like we end with a Hamilton Verstappen 1-2, but the way we got there was completely unexpected. Do you think maybe Russia was treated a bit harshly based on what's happened previously? Like we've had some very dull races at Russia. But if something like this happens at, let's say, I'm just trying to think, if something like this happens at Hungary or a track that maybe we think is normally a bit better and we get a race like this, do you think maybe it's a bit higher, especially when we're talking about sort of what we want in terms of racing? If we want that action throughout all those moments, do you think Russia maybe should have been a bit higher, maybe more than three votes as the best race of the season, Jack?
I mean, it's a good race. It is really good race, but those three that we had, I've looking on the form, and between them, that's more than 60% of the vote. So like, as soon as you get away from those three, which were just incredible races emotionally, and just general quality wise, it's really hard to say. I don't think I'd give it bad credit because it's at Sochi. I think it's probably like fourth or fifth for me. It's definitely one of the ones that are up there. But again, I think it comes down to the emotion that's in the race, and what you remember is that the person who you're really egging on to win and who's like putting their ass on the line and not going for the wet tires is the one who's come out the worst and dropped to seventh. And then that's maybe a bit more of a bummer. And I don't think. Also, if you're looking for that emotion, right, and you're a fan of McLaren or whoever, then you look at Monza again. So it just felt like a slightly. It was a reversed Monza, wasn't it? Almost. And to see Hamilton Verstappen 1-2 at the end of it was just a bit of a shame.
Yeah, it felt very typical, but it was almost like we finally got what we wanted in a way. We got that rain right at the end of a race. We've heard it so many times. Rain on the radar. It hasn't come. And then we've sort of been a bit fed up. But this time we got it. This time it came. Do you think maybe, Chinmay, if it was not Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen that benefited, if it didn't end in sort of a way that was fairly standard, it could be higher? Maybe let's say we get a midfield winner because of the rain. We get a Lando Norris, a Carlos Sainz, something like that. Do you think it was the result that brought it down maybe a bit more?
I think, yeah, definitely. Because, I mean, the whole race, Lando Norris was pretty much dominating the race. And it was an interesting... And it was just, I think, that whole heartbreak that everyone was rooting for Norris. I remember when I was watching the pub, it was really, really... It was like the whole atmosphere just collapsed when Lando Norris just spun off in the rain, and then Lewis Hamilton inherited the win to obviously win the race. I think the result was, I think, a big factor in why it kind of comes down a lot of people probably.
Yeah, and I mean, there's not really much else to say. like to do a quick shout out to the one person that said Spa was the best race of the season, because I think you can't really disagree with that. I mean, when I think this season, you could genuinely say there are about at least, I'd say, 13 races this season that are rewatchable, that either have that moment or have that just sort of throughout the race, have that sort of, so either sort of averages out or it goes high and then comes back down. I think genuinely, I can think of maybe 5 or 6 races this season that I wouldn't want to watch again. I mean, I don't know if you can think of any more, and I think that just says a lot about this season in the end. It's just, apart from, I'd say, Zandvoort, Monaco, the 2 Austrias, and Portugal are the 5 I wouldn't want to watch again. I'd watch every other race at some point. I'm not watching Abu Dhabi again because it's depressing, but it is a rewatchable race. I mean, I don't know, are there any more races for you two that you wouldn't watch again, or genuinely has it been about 15, 16 races this season that have been at the very least good?
I think the majority of the races have been a good big portion of the races have been really good, but I'll probably add, I'm not sure how popular or unpopular this opinion would be, but maybe Mexico, to be fair, because Mexico wasn't exactly the most fun of races to watch, other than that whole first turn 1 dive bomb by Max to overtake both Mercs, and then maybe just to see a checker podium in his own country. I think other than that, there's not really much going on in that race either.
Yeah. I mean, Jack, any more apart from those 5 and maybe Mexico, which, thinking about it, I'd probably agree with a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, the only one I'd say that, like, the next one in the full rankings, probably the USA, but we had a good finish to that race, and there were certainly moments in it where it was interesting. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, just says a lot about this season that we had so many good races, and like such a rewatchable season, except for Monaco. Oh, I forgot to mention Spa. Well, that wasn't a race; that doesn't count. And so it's such a good season. But we'll move on to the elegantly named Most Unexpectedly Good Driver Award, which is an award for the driver who everyone thought would be not great, but then turned out to be quite good. I mean, I'll come to you, Jack, first. What would be your maybe three drivers that are better than you thought they would this season?
I mean, if you phrased it like that, then I expected Lando to be good this season. I think a lot of people didn't, but I did. However, he outshined even what I thought he was capable of this year, especially at the start of the season. I think the first 4 races, he was always best of the rest, regardless of where, how many of the top 4 drivers finished. He had some bad luck right at the end of the season, which I think maybe takes a shine off it, and probably should have been 5th in the championship overall. So Lando's up there. You've got to look at the midfield again and look at Carlos Sainz, because again he was expected to come in and not be as good as Leclerc, to not put as much of a fight up, to be that second driver, and he just frankly wasn't. Again, Leclerc had some bad luck, but I think Sainz won the qualifying battle as well. He certainly won the championship battle, which at the end of the day is what pays the money. So he was phenomenal. 3 podiums this year, that was great. And I think you've probably got to say it's difficult. The third one between Leclerc and Gasly, and Ocon and Alonso. There's so many good ones. I think I would say I can't be Ocon. Ocon won a race, but he wasn't consistently good. So I would probably say Alonso, because there were so many moments where he shined in the season. Not necessarily consistency or it wasn't him going and winning races, but he showed that he still had it. I'd probably put them in reverse order. So Alonso third, and then Sainz second, and Norris first.
Okay, Chinmay?
Mine would be almost the same as Jack's. I think the first one would definitely be Lando Norris. I mean, I expect him to obviously step it up this season because it's his third season. He has been on the upwards trajectory even before the start of the season. But I think just no one expected about how good he would be, but how he really solidified himself and really put himself up there as a potential future world champion. I think, especially some of the drives he's pulled off as well. I think his most deservedly drive would probably be Imola when he got the third place and arguably almost got second until Lewis charged up to Lando again, and then second one would be Carlos Sainz. I think Carlos Sainz is always just left under the radar. I mean, the level of consistency he's shown this season and the way arguably he is, of all the drivers who changed the team this year, I would say he's been the best of all the drivers who changed the team this season, especially because he's been able to adjust to that new car really quickly and obviously deliver all those performances on a consistent basis. And then third, I'll probably give it to Gasly because I think just to see how much he managed to extract out of that AlphaTauri also on a consistent basis. I mean, it's a bit difficult to tell because Tsunoda wasn't exactly the most consistent performer at all this year. I mean, the one thing he was consistent in was damaging the car. But yeah, I think
Oh, yeah.
I think Gasly could probably take my number 3 spot as the most unexpectedly good driver.
Yeah, and I think I might have to agree with those three. Obviously, I think starting off Lando Norris, I think the fact he was in third in the championship for as long as he was at the start of the season, in what was a midfield car, it was a car that was definitely worse than the Mercedes and the Red Bull, but he was the one in third. Like he did have probably a poor end of the season, but was that maybe McLaren thinking that they had already banked third place in the Constructors' Championship? Or was that Lando Norris? And we've got to remember, he was about 3 laps away from winning his first race of the season. Had it not rained in Russia, he had a fairly high chance of winning that race. Obviously, maybe Lewis Hamilton takes the win right at the end. But even so, that race was an outstanding performance. Probably the best of his season. And he just got unlucky that it didn't work out for him in the end. And then number 2, Carlos Sainz. I love Carlos Sainz's podiums in a way, in that they're just always insane. I think the most normal podium he's had has been at at Monaco this year. But other than that, he's been on the podium, or he's not been on the podium at Hungary, at Brazil, and then he gets on the podium after the race. He was on the podium at Russia after all that rain. He was we don't think about it, but he was on the podium at Abu Dhabi, which must have been the most awkward thing on the planet. Just the F1 world has erupted into chaos, and he's just stood there like, this is fine. What am I doing? What am I doing up here? But the consistency he's shown, and especially the level of consistency, considering he's moved team, is top notch. And you think that if there are a number of teams up there next year, if we hope that there are maybe 2, 3, 4 teams up there, and we've got drivers that are as aggressive as Max Verstappen, as Charles Leclerc, maybe even as aggressive as George Russell, if he starts baring his teeth in the Mercedes, then the consistency of Carlos Sainz could win him a title. If those drivers are colliding with one another, then if Sainz just keeps putting in the performances, there's no reason he couldn't win it. And then third, probably go for Gasly as well. I mean, he was finishing consistently 4th and 5th and 6th in an AlphaTauri. I've always said I could never tell how good that car was based on, was it Gasly outperforming it or Yuki Tsunoda underperforming it? But still, you can't say that Gasly had a bad season. And I think it'll be really interesting to see where he goes from here, especially considering he might not want to move back up to Red Bull, especially if Verstappen remains number 1 in that team, as we would expect. I mean, the Google form says Carlos Sainz, 13 responses. Alonso, Alonso in second place with 8 and Norris in third with 7. So, I mean, we'll come on to a driver none of us put in our top 3, but we'd probably all put 4th or 5th, Fernando Alonso. I mean, Chinmay, were you sort of expecting...
Yeah, he
What?
did. Yeah, Jack
I
put
put him third.
Alonso third.
I put him third.
Oh, did oh, I can't... sorry about that.
I know where it's at.
He knows El planned, but did either of you expect Alonso to do as well as he did this season? He had a fairly slow start to the season, I remember, but then by the end of it, he was coming into his own. Obviously, getting that 4th in Hungary, getting that podium in Qatar. Jimmy, do you think this was a good season for Alonso?
Oh, well, definitely is a good season. I mean, don't forget Alonso. He is 40 years old now. He's not He's not. He's not a very young driver anymore. He's got that caliber as well. So, and the fact that he's been 2 seasons away because he first retired in 2018, then came back, or was it this year? And I think we all expected him to take it a bit easy at the start, and then obviously pick up, and then the amount he's picked up to, I think it just shows that how much Fernando's still gotten, and I don't think we ever really doubted his ability to still perform at the top. At the end of the day, it is our plan. It is Fernando Alonso.
I mean, Jack, do you think that, let's say, somehow Alpine have made a really good car next year? 2022, Alpine are up there with Mercedes and Ferrari and McLaren and Red Bull, like a combination of those teams. But Alpine can win races. Do you think Alonso could challenge for a world title, even at his age?
I think that's a very difficult question, and I'm probably going to say no, which is probably not the answer you're expecting or looking for. Especially, I put him on that top 3, but I didn't rate him at the start of the season because of the age, because of the fact that he's not driven in a competitive team for 6 years, probably more than that even. But yeah, he could be good. He could maybe even win a race or 2, especially given how close things are this season. But I couldn't, unless Alpine is significantly better than everyone else, and it's him versus Ocon for the title, I don't think he would win it.
Yeah, and another interesting thing that the Google form brought up was Sainz getting, I guess, 13 responses to Norris's 7. Obviously, I think we all put Norris above Sainz as on our most unexpectedly good driver. But maybe do you think, Jack, that it is sort of recency bias in a way? Like, you see Carlos Sainz, he's finished 5th in the World Championship. He has ended off the season with a podium. He's got a podium. He's got another podium at Russia. He's got another podium at Russia, finished 5th in the World Championship, podium at Abu Dhabi. Whereas Norris, although he started the season quickly, he's sort of fallen back a bit. Do you think that maybe Sainz getting quite substantially more than Norris, almost double his votes, is a bit harsh on Lando Norris, especially with the start of the season he had?
Yeah, I mean, of course I'm going to say that because I voted for Norris, but yeah, I think I do. I think it is a bit of recency bias. I think it's a lot of people not appreciating just how much bad luck Lando had towards the end of the season. I think maybe people are thinking Ricciardo's fallen off rather than necessarily him being in, that McLaren is a good car. Or the other way around, I think Lando's kind of dragging it up to better than it should be, especially when you look at some of the middling speed tracks that he still did well on. He was just both of them were level-headed. Both of them are just like exactly what you want in that 3rd, 4th team. It's just someone who's going to consistently put in the results and not do anything stupid. I can't think of kind of massive mistakes that they've made. Okay, McLaren were put under a lot of pressure at Sochi, and in hindsight, he should have come in, but the team were not decisive in telling him to. Then maybe it's a different matter if he's the one that says, no, I know better, and then he doesn't. That's fine. But they were like, oh, do you think we should come in? And then he was like, he made a solid decision because they were fluffing about it. So if anything, that made me admire him more for that.
I mean, Chinmay, do you think that everyone sort of, I've always felt Carlos Sainz has been that driver that's always been sort of there. I felt like there was a phase from between about 2010 and 2015 where drivers that have come in since then, very few of them have survived in the sport. Like Sainz and Ricciardo are probably the Sainz and Ricciardo are the two that have left. Everyone else has sort of dropped out, and it's almost left Sainz more because Ricciardo ended up in a top team at Red Bull quite early on getting 2014 and then going from there. But Sainz sort of maybe got lost in the shuffle a bit more. Do you think that people are beginning to maybe wake up to the fact that Carlos Sainz is quite a good driver that's never really had that opportunity to shine, and now he is sort of getting that opportunity to shine? He's sort of showing his worth in a way.
Yeah, I think it's just been like that. That Carlos Sainz has just been. Personally, I would say Sainz is criminally underrated as a driver. I think Ricciardo did have that advantage of being in the top team at Red Bull until a few years ago, until he shocked everyone and moved down to the midfield with Renault. But I think especially with the races he's put in, and it's not that he's been putting really good results for the past couple of years now. I mean, you can say it started. People started recognizing all the way back in 2019. I think it was around the Germany time where he's put in. I think he's put like 3 or 4 almost consecutive P5 performances in the McLaren that was at best P4, P5 in 4th or 5th fastest car on the grid. And then you move on towards the end of that season where he actually gets that podium with that podium in Brazil. Then 2020, he obviously, that's when he still was under the radar when he still grudges that podium with Gasly. And because of Gasly winning it. So obviously that overshadowed Sainz's podium, but Sainz was up fighting at the front for the whole race, even before that whole thing where Gasly ended up in front and the whole red flag stuff when after Charles collided into the Warp Parabolica. But then I think especially now, thankfully people are starting to recognize Sainz is actually a really good driver. He's always has been, and now he just needs to be given that chance to show what he can really do in the front running car.
Yeah, and I mean, hopefully he gets that opportunity next year. And I think we can all sort of say most unexpectedly good driver, probably a battle between Sainz and Norris for that one. We'll move on to Rookie of the Year. So obviously 3 candidates. Probably don't need to do a top 3 for this one. Between Schumacher, Mazepin, and Yuki Tsunoda. I mean, I'll come to each of you quickly. Rookie of the Year? Start with Jack.
Oh, what an impossible question between Schumacher and Tsunoda. Both of them have had ups and downs, but they were so far apart on the grid that it's just difficult to compare them. You've got Tsunoda with I think veteran is a bit of an overstatement, but sorry, an overstatement. But Gasly's been there a little while. He's certainly got talent, and it's. You said already, it's so difficult to say where Gasly's at, and that makes it difficult to say where Tsunoda's at. He had a brilliant performance to P4 at, was it Saudi?
I think he finished P4 at Abu Dhabi.
It was Abu Dhabi.
Okay,
It's just that race was so chaotic that no one knows what happened outside of the front two.
It was but I think both of them have crashed out a lot. But given the expectations that were probably put on Yuki's shoulders, and especially the ones he made for himself after the points finish. I think it was P7 or P8 at Bahrain, the first race of the year. What he kind of showed that he could do. I think he spent so long not living up to that I would have to put Schumacher as the rookie of the year.
Okay, I mean, Chinmay.
No, I'll agree with Jack. I'll put Schumacher as the rookie of the year. I mean, Mazepin is just default eliminated from the running, but then, yeah, I think Sonoda. I mean, the thing, especially that whole when he was an F2, I think everyone just had so much expectations because of how quickly he's progressed up the junior ranks, and I think he came up P3 in the 2020 F2 season that year as well. In his rookie season, which was quite impressive in itself. And then he gets put in the AlphaTauri. He has an impressive first race in Bahrain, and then he just drops off completely from there. I mean, like Jack said, it's difficult to compare him with his teammate, who is Pierre Gasly, who's been there a while. While Schumacher had Nikita Mazepin and an absolute dog of a car, which was that Haas, and then which is makes it really hard to like compare the two. But I think just because of that expectation we had of Sonoda, and then he spent practically the whole season not living up to it, and he was ending up, Spinoda, and that doesn't really ring, but he was spinning a lot in the thing. But I think it will just be Schumacher. Just also credit to AG, who did bring that Haas to Q2 twice this season. So I think good.
I think this is a really difficult one. In that I don't not want to say none of them deserve it that much, but it's hard to say. Obviously, two of the rookies are in by far the worst car on the grid. One of them is probably by far the worst driver on the grid, in the worst car on the grid, in Nikita Mazepin. Mick Schumacher, he's quicker, he's won F2, but he did spin it in the wall quite a lot. But is that him? Is that the car being undrivable? Like, it's really hard to tell. And then Yuki Tsunoda, obviously, he comes in with those high expectations, finishing P7 in Bahrain, and then never really lives up to it until sort of the end of the season when he gets that P4 in Abu Dhabi. I think probably Schumacher just edges it out, but maybe more, or for me, but maybe more because Yuki didn't live up to the hype in a way, as opposed to Schumacher doing anything really that merited him being driver or rookie of the year. He got to Q2 twice. One of those times he crashed, couldn't take part. It's such a hard one this year because there were three rookies. None of them really, or two of them didn't really get the opportunity to perform based on the car they had. One of them didn't perform regardless of the car he had. One of them didn't get the opportunities. One just didn't perform, and then Mazepin did both in somehow being bad in a Haas, being bad for Haas, like regardless of where he was on the grid. And I think that is what the poll generally said. Schumacher with 20 votes, and then Tsunoda with 14. And I think probably on balance, fair. And Schumacher wins, maybe a bit belated, the Rookie of the Year awards. Right. We'll move on to some quick ones before we come on to the final big award, Driver of the Year. And we'll start with Best Livery. So this can be any livery. This can be a standard livery, a one-off livery that we had this season. I mean, we don't really need to do a top three. So start with Jack. Best livery of the season.
It's so tricky. I think there's some I can eliminate straight away. Haas, definitely. Red Bull, definitely, because it's boring as hell. AlphaTauri, I didn't like either. I like the wheels, but apart from that, I didn't like the weird shiny McLaren. Aston Martin was awful. And then the other ones are really tricky to decide. I think Ferrari were screwed up because of the weird green thing and that leaves quite a few. I'm gonna go with. I can't believe I'm saying this. I'm gonna go with Williams. At the start of the season, I thought it was the worst one, and it's grown on me so much. Especially in the races. There are so many blue cars this year, and that was the one that you always knew what was, you always knew what team it was, and I like their whole design philosophy. So there's a little bit of that as well. I like the digits. I like the George Russell switching in the 63 and the GR, and I just like the colours they've got. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Williams.
Okay, Chinmay.
I think I might have to go with the McLaren Golf livery that they put in Monaco, because it just looks so good, that thing. But I think if I just go for the normal liveries, I probably might give it to the black Mercedes livery that they've done. It looks so good especially under the lights. It looks so good, in my opinion. I think I probably just have to give it in that respect, just because of how good it looks under the lights.
Yeah, you've stolen my choices again. I like that Golf livery that McLaren used. I don't think it works on F1 cars. I think it works on sort of like, know what I mean. Like I'm thinking of a bonnet of like the Porsches, there's a lot more light blue and that contrasts with the orange really well. But because obviously we've got the narrow noses, it's just mainly orange. I just don't think the Golf livery really works on an F1 car. But again, I'm gonna have to go for the black Mercedes. I'm such a sucker for those black Mercedes. They're genuinely so nice looking, and I like the evil vibe they give off. Like they're the dominant ones. They're the dominant team with the dominant drivers. They're the ones that everyone's trying to beat, and it does feel like when you have that black livery, like the Empire from Star Wars. They're the ones that everyone's trying to fight against. I mean, I don't know. This might be ridiculous. Jack, you're shaking your head there.
I don't think this Death Star would be as scary if it just had AMG, 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 AMG written all over it. I think their livery this year was a downgrade from last year's one. I think it's still good, but yeah.
I think I'd probably agree with that, but I think it's a bit like downgrading from a 10 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10. And I know what you mean by what the Williams was this season, but I do think the liveries this season weren't brilliant. Like Alpine was fairly dull, Haas was awful, AlphaTauri was a downgrade from last season. Alfa Romeo was, I think, also a downgrade from last season. Red Bull.
No, you don't say that. Alfa Romeo was good. Alfa Romeo was good.
Yeah, I'm with Jack on this. Alfa Romeo was a good one. Alfa Romeo was still good this season.
Yeah, but I mean, I just don't think anyone really had that good of a livery this season. I mean, Aston Martin was probably the biggest disappointment. It seemed to get worse as the season went on, especially because it was just so boring.
Yeah, we have today had the announcement that BWT are actually going to leave F1. So maybe we'll see it next year with the kind of the livery that it should have been originally, with the lime green on. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, but I mean, I just think the liveries this year weren't the best. But I guess we're giving it to Mercedes once again, I'd say once again. And I really hope they don't fulfill the rumours and go back to silver. I want to see a black Mercedes for the next few years to come. We'll come to one final award before we move on to the driver of the year, overtake of the year. And I'll start with you, Jack, for this one.
Impossible choice. I'm going to think of one and I'll say it, and then immediately I've said it, I'll think of another one that was better. There are so many good ones, aren't there?
Run us through some of the ones you're thinking through.
I mean, there's a lot of ones where they push each other out. It really depends on whether you include my indignation as part of a good overtake. Like Verstappen at Imola, the first corner, was that a good overtake, or was it because it's allowed? You know, he got away with it. Let's think. Alonso on who was it? The first corner at Kota. Or was that penalised in the end? Was that Raikkonen? I think it was Raikkonen on, or was it Giovinazzi on Alonso?
Yeah, I think it was Raikkonen on Alonso. That was quite a good one.
All the big ones between the title contenders. Hamilton on Verstappen at Brazil. You could argue that. You could argue. Oh God, what was it? I don't know. I just don't think none of them really stood out as like absolutely obscene, but there were just a lot of overtakes that were pretty damn good this year.
No, I know what you mean.
Verstappen on the Mercs in Mexico.
Yeah, I mean that was going to be my one. I know, but I know what you mean about sort of this season. There weren't that many standout overtakes. Like we think to last season, we had. I can think of two instantly. I can think of Russell and Bottas at Sakir, and then I think it's Gasly. It was Gasly on Perez at Spa, and it still upsets me that Russell's overtake beat Gasly's overtake, because if someone manages to overtake down into Eau Rouge and then up the hill, that wins. You win. You don't do better overtakes than that normally. Like unless something truly obscene happens, nothing beats that for me. I mean, Chinmay, what would you sort of put as your overtake of the year?
Ooh, I think I'll probably give it to Max on the Mercs at Mexico. Just that late braking, that was a late braking, and then probably a second place I'll probably give would probably be Norris on Leclerc at Monza when he ran around after the first chicane. Maybe that would be second one. Yeah, I think there's no standout overtakes as such. There's been a few good overtakes, but there's nothing like, oh my god, there's been that one overtake that really mesmerized everyone this year. So yeah it's just
in my head canon. I think it was Hamilton and Vettel, wasn't it? The one that we never got to see at Monza. At Monaco. In my mind, that's the best overtake that we should ever have seen. So I'll pass forward.
Yeah, and I think I'd probably go for Max on the Mercedes, maybe just because contextually it was really important. He needed to get into first at a track that they were expected to dominate at, but then hadn't got that 1-2 start, and it could have really cost them, but Max made it work. I think another one, though it pains me to say, probably Max on Lewis, just maybe less for the overtake, because obviously Max is on stupidly fresh tyres compared to Lewis, and it's a lot easier, but just contextually, like like it's the final lap of the final race of the season, and there's an overtake for the lead, for the championship, and it was a good overtake. Like no one else overtook there, I think, throughout the entire race. Obviously, he benefited, but people were thinking maybe that was a mistake. If Hamilton had got back around the outside on either of the straights, that could have been a mistake, and Lewis would have won the title. I think had that happened, I'd probably give that hypothetical overtake to Lewis. And I think another one that stands out for me a bit more was Max on, I think, the second restart in Saudi Arabia. Like, it's a firm overtake, but it's quite fair. Like, he's thrown it up the inside, and it has worked for him. Obviously, he's relied on the other two drivers, but he stayed on the track. Obviously, 3 into 1 corner doesn't really work. So you're always expecting someone to go off there. But again, it mattered. It made a difference because he had to get up there to prevent Lewis running off into the distance. So I've just said 3 Max overtakes. You'd think I was a Max Verstappen fan, but we'll end on the final award, and it's probably the one that matters the most: Driver of the Year. I mean, we'll go back to the top 3, and we'll start with you, Chinmay. Who would you be your top 3 drivers of the year?
I think third I'll give to Norris, mainly because of that first half of the season, he was just mesmerizingly good, and the fact that he stayed P3 in the championship for as long as he did, that was impressive in a midfield car. Second, I'll give to Lewis. I would put an upper Max first. I think my reasoning would be is that I think across the whole season as a whole, personally speaking, I do feel Max kind of was slightly more consistent than Lewis. And I think Lewis, especially in the first half of the season, Lewis did make a few mistakes that he shouldn't have made. Like, for example, when he went to the on the gravel in Imola, or when he overdid his brakes at Baku, for example. And I think there are one or two other incidents where Lewis didn't do as well as he should have, and he did make the mistakes. And I think Max, he did make mistakes, and I think most notably that Q3 incident in Saudi Arabia when he binned it in the very last corner. Is that he has, and you can say his slightly over aggressive driving, mainly like Brazil and Saudi and stuff like that. But I do feel that he's been slightly better across the whole season compared to Lewis Hamilton, personally speaking. But I'm not trying to downgrade the fact that Lewis also deserved the championship or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, Jack, would you agree or just slightly different?
No, I'm dead, and that's exactly the same 1, 2, 3 as I've got. I think it was certainly a lot closer for 1-2 than it was, 4 races from the end of the season. But I think Lewis showed that he is godlike when his back is to the wall. I think there are certain times when he's given that mentality, and you just cannot stop him when it feels like the world's against him, but he can still do something about it. So I think you think of Villa when he's put it in the wall himself, and then he comes back to P2, I think it was. You think about Silverstone when he's been given that 10-second penalty and he's got to hunt through the 4. You could think about Brazil when he has to overtake 28 drivers in the weekend, or however many. I can't remember exactly how many it was. 24, I think. But obviously, that's not quite worked out for him in the final lap. He did give it a very good shot at Abu Dhabi. Maybe he could have just gone for Hail Mary, finish or don't. But he showed excellent. He showed that when his day is there, he's better than anyone else, even Max. But just like Max is a machine, just like consistently throughout the season. And I think we saw that at certain races when he just run. Like there was nothing Mercedes could do strategy wise. You think Zandvoort or even Paul Ricard, where he coming from behind and he starts the race off not too well. It felt like there was nothing to be done for Mercedes there. Whereas when Mercedes won, it always felt like Red Bull were a threat to them.
And yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to have to agree with the top 3 as well. Obviously, we've spoken about Lando Norris. I still think there's probably been recency bias when people say Lando Norris didn't have as good of a season as he very obviously did. Like starting the season in such an incredible run of form, and then like we've said throughout, getting that unlucky point, and then I think you can't really say the top 2 are any other than Verstappen and Hamilton. I really think that it just mattered on who won the title for me. If Hamilton had won the title, I'd probably put him first for driver of the year. Verstappen had won it, which he did, and that is why I put him first. For every week that you had a Verstappen seemingly like crazy fest, or where he was not driving to the best of his like abilities, where I'm thinking maybe a Saudi Arabia and a Monza or things like that. You had and like a Brazil. You had weeks like Monaco. You had weeks like Zandvoort, the 2 Austria races, where he was just out of his skin. And like you said, Jack, they never felt in those races like he was being threatened by anyone. It always felt like he was just out there on his own. And I guess it says a lot that I said the 2 Austrias, Zandvoort and Monaco, were some of the most boring races of the season for me. It's not because Max Verstappen won. it's because he was so dominant. It's because Mercedes didn't seem to be able to challenge him. And it was going back to sort of like the races of 2019, 2020, where they were fairly standard and we didn't really have interesting races because then it was Lewis Hamilton dominating and now it was Max Verstappen dominating. I think he's a very deserving world champion, and if he just won Abu Dhabi normally without any FIA interference, I think that people would be completely fine with it. But it's not his fault that they interfered in the way they did. And he won the most races, got the most poles, got the, I think, joint most or most fastest laps, most points, obviously. Like, he led more laps than everyone else combined this season. And that is ridiculous. I think that just says a lot about how dominant he was. And Lewis Hamilton, I think, had a poorer season than he's had for a long time. Like you've mentioned there, Chinmay, the mistakes he made in Imola, in Baku, probably in Monaco as well, not getting that first lap in and then not being able to get a second one in because Charles Leclerc crashed. I think this was a poor season from Lewis Hamilton. Well, if we take it by Lewis Hamilton's high standards, this was probably his poorest season for a while. But then, as Jack said, when his back is to the wall, he becomes one of the best drivers we have ever seen and probably will ever see. Like, I think back to 2016 when he's, I think, 28 points down or something like that. Like 29 with 4 races to go. He wins the final 4. He does all he can. Obviously, it's not enough. He basically had done all he can at the final few races here, obviously. And if Latifi doesn't crash, he wins the title, and it's ridiculous. He just seems to be able to perform. I mean, do both of you think that this might galvanise him towards an 8th world title next year, assuming Mercedes obviously have a car that can win the title? Do you think this, like we see 2016, you see a difference between 2014, 2015 Lewis to 2017 to 20 Lewis, who suddenly became one of the most complete drivers probably in the prime of his career? Do you think we might get that next season as well, especially as Mercedes might feel a bit aggrieved about what happened with the situation with the FIA and Red Bull, Jack?
I think the first 2-3 races are going to make a massive difference to that. I think you obviously said, given Mercedes have got the car to do it, and that's such a difficult thing to do, but it's also to do with his relationship with George Russell, to do with his relationship with Valtteri Bottas in some ways. Definitely not been the same because it's within the team versus without. I think maybe he feels it's difficult because we saw Toto celebrating the fact that they won the constructors, and there's obviously some solace you can take in that. But it's not quite the same as if you lose to your teammate. In some ways, obviously losing to your teammate is probably the worst thing ever. And in some ways, it's stayed within your team, and you've beaten him 2 years in a row already anyway in equal cars. So you know you're the better driver, and you feel like that's bad luck. I think he's going to struggle to come back from this as hard as he did in 2017. I think George is going to push him more. I think I can't comment on where the cars are going to be, but I don't think it's going to be as clear cut that Mercedes will be as far down the road as they were in 2017. So yeah, we'll have to see on that one.
Yeah, and I mean, just finally, Chinmay, do you think that maybe just because they lost this title that the strategy could change in 2022? Or if we assume they are to have a front-running car, do you think that maybe, especially if George Russell takes time to bed in, it will become sort of more of a standard Mercedes, what we've seen in the last few years? And then once Lewis Hamilton has won his 8th world title, he's got to the top of the tree on all metrics, basically, then George Russell might be not allowed to become a bit more of a challenge to him, but maybe just naturally becomes a bit more of a challenger.
I think It depends on how quickly Russell does get used to Mercedes and how quick he is relative to Hamilton. And I don't think that we would see much of a strategy change. I mean, even to be if George is clearly faster than Lewis and Mercedes especially do have a front running car, they would potentially might start favoring Russell over Hamilton, because at the end of the day, Mercedes have been so close on so much with they've been supporting so much of Russell as well. And at the end of the day, he's been with the team since 2013 now. So you're approaching his 9th or 10th year with the team now. So it is a difficult one to tell, because it just all depends on how competitive Mercedes are next year, really, to be honest.
Yeah, and so we went for Verstappen Driver of the Year. The poll also went for Verstappen, 23 responses. Lewis Hamilton 6, and then Norris and Gasly both on 2, Sainz on 1. I think it's fair to say Verstappen Driver of the Year. You can't really deny that in any way. But that has sort of been the end of this podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. I mean, Chinmay, do you want to add anything else quickly?
No, I'm just saying I'm looking forward for next season, man. Next season will be interesting.
Yeah, and Jack, I mean, anything else you want to add?
I mean, sorry, I disappeared for a second there. I'm not sure if you noticed, but I think we missed the most important thing of all, the most important competition of the year, which was F1 Society versus Raw Sport in the predictions battle.
That is a good point.
Which came down to we didn't.
I don't know who won because I wasn't here.
Yeah, so we never set any forfeits or I guess gains for winning, but it did come down to the last round, 4-3 going in for Raw Sport, and I did just clinch it. Ziga fought for F1 Society without realizing he was. So yeah, it came out as 4-all. I feel pretty happy that secured the draw in the end, because it definitely could have gone your way. I went all in at the final race as well, and Yuki's P4 kind of saved me. So
yeah, I mean, it's a fair. I think it was a fair result. I think we both brought expertise to the role. Maybe some predictions were a bit better than others throughout the season, but that has been the end of this. Make sure to keep following what we do over the off season. We'll probably be doing it a bit less regularly, trying to get something out every 2 weeks, but I'm sure there'll always be something to talk about, and it's not actually that long. It's only March until we start the season. It's probably about February when we start seeing the new cars, so it shouldn't be that long to wait. I mean, that's everything. So thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and make sure to continue to check us out throughout the next term. Bye.